Hello and welcome. I will be giving a brief talk about my new self-published book, The Subjective. The book is available on, for example, Amazon, in paper and ebook. I will first explain how this book relates to me, as I am, perhaps, not the typical philosophy author. I have some studies in philosophy as a part of my interest, but I chose to have a career in software instead of philosophy. What is software? For most people, software is the user experience. But for us who build software, the nature of software is how we build it. Every piece of software is an expression of code, written in a programming language. Therefore, software is language. This language serves two purposes. It needs to instruct the computer processor, and it needs to be human readable to be understood by fellow programmers. In IT, we work with these specialist languages, and a programmer needs to know tens of them. To me, the most interesting part has been what these languages are, and the whole field of IT carries a sense of mystery around this. During my studies, I found that the really interesting questions, the ones related to intelligent machines, AI and such, have a very idealistic and hyperbolic culture of discussion around them, constantly sort of avoiding saying out clearly that this is all about a dream of what will one day be possible with these machines if we just could reach that one significant step further. But how could we create intelligent machines writing just machine code? Machines are not intelligent, rather they're stupid. And it is us, programmers, who need to be intelligent. But this part you don't see as the user of software. As a student in computer science, I found this mystifying discourse disturbing, as I am somebody who likes to ask the deep ground questions and I was not getting any answers. I felt that if there are actually any deeper philosophical foundations to these problems, they definitely were somewhere hidden and not known by the people who work within the field, who are fascinated but not critical enough about these questions. So I had to take my problem with computer languages one step deeper to the problem of language altogether. I learned that the fact that computers are operated with language has a history to it. Starting from the 50s, our theory of mind started looking at the mind as a digital process. This is mostly the influence of Noam Chomsky, who started looking at all language, including human language, as strings. His work started a cognitive revolution in science. People started to think that minds are computers, as the time was ready for that. Computers were interesting. Exact natural science was the name of the game. Why not try thinking in a new way that minds are computers? Even in psychology, the cognitive paradigm surpassed behaviorism, which is why they keep telling us that the mind is a computer. Also, the same paradigm is everywhere. They say things like genes carry data, etc. It is worth noticing that the focus on merely the syntactic aspect of language has from the very beginning been adopted with the idea that at some point somebody will come and fix the semantics of the syntax to attach the syntax to the meaning of words. This has never happened, and the problem is not in that we aren't trying hard enough, but in our approach. The problem is that we treat language in this way and don't see the inherent error in it. The fact that early computers were immediately associated with language is because that was the philosophical way of the time. Before cognitivism, there had been a linguistic turn in philosophy, and people were, so to say, chasing the unicorn horn by discovering rules behind our use of language. However, I think the last person who got language right was the last person of this philosophical trend, Wittgenstein. After him, it's been only downhill in that department, and I think it is imperative to revisit Wittgenstein to regain a correct understanding of what languages are. It is not a coincidence that the cognitive paradigm began in the early 50s, as that is when Wittgenstein died, and with him also died the linguistic philosophical trend, where we place a high emphasis to the meaning of the expressions we use. Modernly, our philosophy doesn't pay much serious attention to languages, apart from accepting the cognitive paradigm, where we look at syntax and assume some mathematical or algorithmic rules that are somehow magically happening inside a person, or, say, a child learning language. I believe we are on this mystifying track because proper philosophers don't have much say against computationalist technological arguments of the new generation. In other words, philosophers have grown old. After Wittgenstein, philosophy of mind has been focusing on somehow scientifically determining or measuring how the mind is constituted. And I think there is rather an active disinterest at looking at the very concepts that are the basis of how we talk about these things. We are living a neo-naturalist trend, where we only like to measure and prove by empirical evidence, not word and logic. The result is a big confusion of language, and what they teach these days about human thought and the mind is unreliable at best, because of the internal contradiction in the underlying conceptual basis. This confusion is something that my book is set out to tackle. But the confusion of language is not the only thing that bothers me in a world that is technology-oriented and evidence-based. The most important perspective is missing from conversation today, the subjective perspective, which includes things such as truth, authenticity, morality, values, and subjective beliefs. In my opinion, people are primarily moral creatures, and by this I mean that we make our decisions based on our moral sentiments, instead of what a lot of the naturalist science would like to say, that we are essentially machines somehow unconsciously guided by our brains, genes or such. I think those are hopelessly fatalistic and desperate ways of explaining human behavior, and the objective mathematical philosophy of language has crept its way into our mainstream and everyday life without relevant competition. I have borrowed the ethical foundations of my thought from Kierkegaard, whom Wittgenstein incidentally saw as the great mind of the century before him. So, in my book, I set myself on a mission to get to the very bottom of the linguistic confusion in our modern evidence-based world, the confusion between how we talk about things that are private to ourselves and those that we share with others. The book is a focused effort to clarify the subjective and the objective, and an attempt to also clarify why it is that we get these things so wrong, what causes the confusion. Also, the book is an elevation of the subjective, as we tend to modernly think, along the scientific principles, that subjectivity is a vice and objectivity is good and desirable. And this is something I don't accept. It is rather dangerous to think that way. Objectivity is good and desirable within a very particular context. But subjectivity also has its own place, and there's a lot of trouble to be expected from ignoring this. And that was all I wanted to say. Now you can go ahead and either find the time to read the book, or then not read it. I hope I managed to explain enough to tickle your fancy if you are into this sort of thing, or to make it clear that you should steer away in case not. Thank you.